Welcome to RevOps Revolution, where we focus on changing the game for driving revenue. Join your host, Jesse Morris, each episode to dive into different areas that drive change and revenue across real organizations. While you're thinking of it here, go ahead and pull out your app, your favorite podcast player, and hit subscribe. That way you don't miss any future episodes. Ready to get going? Let's go. Here's to the revolution.
Welcome to another day of the revolution. I'm your host, Jesse Morris. And today we are lucky to have another RevOps professional, which I actually think might be the first time on the show I've had somebody else in RevOps join us, which I'm really excited about today. Steven, super excited to have you. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. First RevOps person. Wow. No pressure, huh?
No pressure. No pressure at all. No, it's funny. I think up until this point, it's been mostly like other people in, the go-to-market org, but haven't had anybody in the RevOps space. So fun to have somebody else join.
Nice.
So Steven, it's kind of funny, man. I think you and I met maybe a month ago at this point. And the crazy thing about how we met is, just for anybody listening, is I was on LinkedIn and stalking, probably like some of you do. And I saw one of the other kind of RevOps leaders post about a problem, a challenge they were trying to solve for. And I saw this guy comment about a different way to solve a problem. And I'm not gonna lie, like I geek out over this stuff. I'm always looking for new ways to do things. And I think probably like most of us, we all know that, with Gen AI and some of these other things that have come out recently, like it's only a matter of time before these things really take over. But I think probably like most of you listening in or watching today, like we're waiting and seeing, right? There's a lot of like, let's just wait to see what's out there. And so I reached out to Steven and I was like, hey dude, can we hop on a call? And he's like, what is this about, man? Like, what do you want to connect on? And I really, ultimately just curious. Like, I think at the end of the day, like that's me to a T. And so, I think super excited. He and I met like, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks ago, kind of talked through. So a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about today, which is really exciting. And I like, it's funny. My team will tell you, I've been on this whole rampage since you and I met last time. And I think some people are like, Jesse, just chill out. You don't have to get so excited about this stuff. But this stuff is exciting, I think, ultimately. And so I'm really, really stoked to talk through it today with you.
Nice. Yeah, good to be here. I had to make sure there's no pitch slap when you reached out. Like people always sneak into the DMs wanting to chat. And before you know it, that you're on a product demo that you didn't realize you signed up for.
I know how that goes. And you get that like sense, like all your antenna go up of like, oh no, what is he reaching out for? So thanks for taking the coffee time. So Steven is a director at an automation company, which actually ties in nicely to a lot of the things we're talking about today. And you've been in the RevOps marketing ops space for a while now, right?
Yeah. So I entered into the market over a decade ago. So, I initially started out with Salesforce and Pardot at the time, for those who might be working with Pardot. So, yeah, came in as an intern over a decade, was an analyst, and I've been in it ever since.
That's awesome. And talk to me a little bit, like talk a little bit about your journey, because I think for those listening, I think one of the cool things, especially on this podcast, is it's been fun to hear how people kind of ended up where they are. And yeah, what does that look like for you? Because I think one of the things that stood out to me the other day was just even your current company, how you got there. It's very similar to some of my past experiences, and I think very unique for a lot of people out there listening.
Yeah, sure. So I was in high school, and I found an internship straight out of a high school at a university. So it was like a school paid internship, I guess. And I was an analyst on a marketing team. And I wanted nothing to do with marketing operations, rev ops, sales ops, none of it. I wanted to be basically an analyst, kind of like a data nerd. At the time, I had an 18-month internship. About 6 months in, my direct manager left, and he was the administrator for Pardot. And they came to me and they're like, all right, well, you're the next qualified person to take over the system. So like full on accidental admin. They gave it to the junior guy who's been there for 6 months. So I took over Pardot. I kind of figured it out, and then I started working closer with the sales admin team. And then, like, sure enough, a year later, I ended up falling in love with marketing operations, or at that time, it was really just like marketing automation. And then it kind of grew into marketing ops. So then I was kind of in marketing ops at a few different companies, learning different tools, Marketo, HubSpot, worked at an agency kind of along the way, worked at Yellow Pages. So like I've kind of worked with like nonprofits, SMB, enterprise, kind of bouncing back and forth between agency and in-house. And then, yeah, I landed at where I am today as director of automation solutions. So I get to build out all the fun little workflows and automations here.
And I'm gonna just like poke a little bit into that. Can you just like couple sentences? How did you end up where you're at today? Like what was the thing that came about for you to actually end up where you are? I think that's a cool story.
Uh, Being wildly curious, like curiosity and saying yes has kind of gotten me to where I am from learning all the different tools and then just being very flexible where like I try not to like tie myself to a specific platform or ecosystem. Uh, and I think like that's kind of gotten me to where I am today. That was way more than one sentence though.
That was good though. That was good. Like for those listening today, we're going to talk about a topic that I think a lot of it's very catchy today. You know, it's a hot topic. Typically, not a lot of meat. We're actually going to go into the weeds a little bit today because I think you know what I think a lot of us, maybe not everybody, but I think a lot of people are starting to ask the question of there's got to be a better way. We've got so many different tech stacks out there, so many different tools, and a lot of it's kind of disparate, right? It's like multiple places all across the board. And so today we're gonna kind of go in and just take a look at what's maybe a different way of doing things, and really, I think, arguably, I would say where things are headed. And so I'm gonna just a little teaser as we get into this, but I did want to kind of tee it up for you guys. But you know, I'd be curious, Stephen, on your end, like you know, you've been in this space for a little while now. Can you talk a little bit about how you've been seeing the landscape from a tool technology perspective change, just even in the last 12 months, since really you know, ChatGPT and all of these other kind of generative AI solutions, as well as other capabilities, have really come out, you know, at least shown other technology companies what is potential, you know, what is possible.
Yeah. So, I mean, when ChatGPT came out, it was all about like content generation, generative AI, and just kind of weaving that into your process. So, using ChatGPT to write emails and you know, very very basic stuff. And then I'd say over the last 12 months, it's gotten a little bit more interesting, where we've kind of moved more into like the agents side of AI, where you've got companies like Salesforce and HubSpot and pretty much every B2B SaaS company you can think of, you know, having some sort of AI agent component to their product and solution. So we're starting to kind of see in app, I think, agents pop up. So like that's really exciting, but it's causing kind of issues for ops teams where you know before the problem was you know, the tech stack automations. Where do I build my automations? Do I build them in a CRM? Do I build them in a marketing automation platform? Do I build them, you know, in a third party? You know, what do we do there? And then now it's like we have the same problem with agents. It's like, well, do we use the agent in Salesforce? Do we use the agent in HubSpot? So it's interesting kind of seeing how the landscape is shifting, but I am seeing like more and more real world applications for agents specifically within RevOps. And it gets me excited because like it's really cool. It's fun to play with.
So again, I think for those listening, you know, a lot of us have heard the word agent. Salesforce obviously loves to market. Salesforce also has a reputation for doing that very well. Can we just like, can you dig in a little bit? What is like for those listening that maybe don't know anything? Just lay out like when you say the word agent, what exactly are you talking about?
Yeah. So in the old way of doing kind of automations and integrations, we think of things like almost like a mind map of if else kind of statements where it's very prescriptive. You say, okay, the data is coming from this system. This is kind of like how I want it to be mapped out into other systems. You're mapping custom fields, and you basically have kind of like a wireframe of logic that you built out. So that's the old way of doing it. Now, when I say an agent, basically what you're doing is you're providing an LLM or your agent with a set of tools that they can then leverage, but they get to pick and choose what tool to accomplish the task that you've asked it to do in any order and as many times as they want. So like if we're staying within kind of the Salesforce realm, you will provide it the tool to update a record or create a record or look up a record. So, you know, you want to provide it to your sales team. They can do, you know, opportunity research. So they can leverage it how they want. And then the agent is basically leveraging the tools that you as the ops person has, you know, provided to it. So that's what I mean. Agent is like an autonomous kind of LLM leveraging tools on behalf of the user in the best way that makes sense for the prompt or the request coming into it.
And again, LLM. Let's specify what that is.
Large language model. So you can think of like OpenAI, ChatGPT, Anthropic, Gemini, all those fun ones.
Perfect. And so I think like as we're looking at this, I don't know about you, but we're hearing the buzz, right? Like Salesforce is obviously spending a ton of money talking about agents. I've yet to see a lot of it.
Yeah.
I know that like I got my Tableau rep, and Salesforce rep reached out to me last week about going to the Tableau conference in a few months, and
Mm,
and a big part of even the push of that, like I was looking at the flyer for it, it's all agent specific, right? So
yep.
there's a lot of buzz here, but I don't know about you, like I still have yet to really see this play out well. Like we're starting to see, like there's a couple of tools I've been looking at recently, like around outbound, for example, that are starting to get good at like writing copy, which again is exactly what you said, like 12 months ago. And so now we're actually starting to see that kind of. It's almost like the things that ChatGPT was doing well 12 months ago. Finally, these other tools that have been around for a while have figured out how to adopt them and really just embed them in their tools, for lack of a better word. That's
Sure.
about the extent of what I've really seen so far. And I think you're starting to see some other companies maybe get their act together a little bit and figure it out. But I think a lot of people are still kind of waiting for what's here. When you see and you look out ahead, like, and again, obviously you work for a company that automation is very central and ingrained in what you guys do. Like,
Yeah.
where do you see this and how do you see this shifting over the next couple of years?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm biased. I work for basically an AI company, but I see as an ops professional, I see us moving away from. Well, I don't know how far we want to move out in the future, but let's just say 2 years. We're moving to more of an interface that isn't page layouts. Like right now, when you think of any system that you operate in, you think in page layouts, records, search bars and stuff like that. I think we're going to move more to where it is going to be more chat based. So you can do things like uploading records, researching, even things like attribution, like marketing attribution. I'm just trying to figure out, what contributed to that person getting into a conversation with your sales team. So I really do think it's going to be ingrained, but it's at the tool level to figure out how they want to deploy that to their users. You can do it via Slack, but my guess is we're going to see a lot of in-app type communication. So like the way that we interface with tools, I think is going to change within the next 2 years. So when you log into HubSpot or Salesforce, you're not going to think, oh, what page layout do I need to go to look up this person? It's going to be like, hey, I have an email address or some sort of name or something, and you provide that to Agentforce or whatever it is, and it literally will have a whole separate screen that it builds for you based on your request. So I think that's where we're moving. It's going to get kind of exciting if that's where it is, and then you just run into the issues of, okay, now I have an agent in this tool and this tool and this tool. Managing agents kind of becomes the new problem.
And not only managing agents, but also managing the permissions of those agents and what
Yeah.
data is shared across all those agents, right? Which is the
Yep.
big challenge, right? And I think, as we look through this, weirdly enough, and you and I talked about this a little bit, but it's probably going to be more of a shift from these individual technologies kind of ruling on to really more of a platform that manages kind of the input of data. So probably a similar platform to what you're working at, but
Yep.
very API centric, managing role based access controls and really getting permission sets and sharing data across multiple services, right?
Yeah, I mean, think of any SaaS, B2B SaaS tool. Like, what are they at their core? It's a data and endpoints, right? The GUI interface that Salesforce provides you essentially is just a way to interact with the APIs and the data that they have. So if that GUI interface can be replaced by something like an agent that knows what all those endpoints are, and it can kind of bridge the gap between the super technical kind of developer and then like the front end user who knows what they want but they don't know how to get it, like things get interesting pretty quick. So yeah, I'm excited for the future. The race to who's going to own, I think, the kind of the front end interface for B2B SaaS has already taken off. I'm curious how much OpenAI will kind of step into that, or if they're going to continue just back end licensing where you have Agentforce that Salesforce is selling you, but behind the scenes it's OpenAI, right? So a lot of that stuff is just white labeled OpenAI.
And I'm going to take us on a little bit of a tangent here, but would you agree that like probably the company's best position, obviously Salesforce is positioned well just because they're so big on kind of the marketplace and API realm approach already, and so many things integrate there.
Hmm.
But I'd actually say, in some ways, I actually think this is one of the bigger threats to Salesforce at the time, because I think it's kind of a door opening to some of these other companies, like the one you're at, like some other ones out there that have
Yeah.
already figured out kind of they're more of the integration game. That's been more of the focus, and so they're probably really well positioned. Wouldn't you agree to at least vie for a spot at the table here?
Yeah, so like I sit within, so my company sits within like the iPaaS space, right? So when it comes to using agents, the issue that you're going to have is just connectivity, right? Like having that agent be able to connect securely to all of these different kind of APIs. Salesforce is great for connecting to Salesforce products. So like your agent force might be able to connect to Data Cloud, Marketing Cloud, and the CRM side, Service Cloud, right, it's going to be able to work within that kind of ecosystem really well. Same thing with HubSpot. But when you want to take actions that are above and beyond just the Salesforce ecosystem, things start to kind of fall apart. The user interface is clunky. You require development resources to plug into APIs. So like the iPaaS space specifically is poised so well because they've solved the connectivity issue. And then all they need to do is layer around the user interface on top of it to make it easy to the end user. And like
And
that's what I've been tasked with. Like that's what we're trying to solve over here is make it easy and safe for employees to leverage agents and AI within their organization.
that's awesome. And I think, the cool thing about that is, again, it really, to your point earlier, it really pushes everything back onto the purpose. These tools are, to your point, are kind of a mechanism to gather key data points across an organization. And really what we're talking about is then really a platform to kind of rule all platforms to a degree,
Yep.
and really manage those platform, manage what information can be shared where. And ultimately, and this is something you and I, and we'll talk about this some here in a bit, is like, do you want to have to manage these agent logic, all the logic that, because agents do require some, obviously, some engagement, some logic. Do you want to have to individually manage that? Or is there a possibility where there's one platform really kind of driving the overall logic? And so, creating that 100% kind of clear view visibility versus
Yeah.
this embedded within each tool.
Yeah, absolutely. Like having an agent have access to your, like I oversimplified it, right? Like sure, it has access to your system to update lookup records and stuff, but like just using marketing as an example, like let's say the agent has the ability to create a campaign in Salesforce. It still needs the internal context and grounding of like, okay, what is your campaign hierarchy? What is your naming conventions? Like what is one team's rules and protocols different from another team's rules and protocols? So like the knowledge and the grounding is so important that you can't just give it tools to go do the thing that the user's asking. You kind of have to protect the users from themselves, where you have that framework that the agent can access, so where it can walk the user through what's the right way to do something versus just doing what someone asks, which can get dangerous quick.
Very, very quickly. So, look, we've done a good job, I think, painting high level ideas behind this. Let's talk about use cases, because I think for people listening out there, it's always easier to say, okay, here's a problem I'm trying to solve. That's why I reached out to you, right? So,
Yep.
let's talk a little bit. You and I've kind of thrown some of these out, but what are some of the use cases that you see, just right off the bat, where you're like, man, these could really be impactful, that these agents could really help, solve or really enable better capabilities across an organization.
Yeah, so I'll provide two examples, one for marketing, one for sales. And if you have another department that you want me to like throw out an example for, happy to. So marketing is a good example. So whenever marketing sends out an email, this applies to literally every organization. You send out an email to, let's say, 100,000 people. You get a flood of autoresponders coming back into your inbox. Things like out of office, unsubscribe requests, no longer with the company. There's like there's a treasure trove of data in those emails to keep your database updated. If you were to feed those emails to something like an agent to go through using natural language, like, oh, this person's out of office, they're going to be back, next Monday. It can go look up the record in Salesforce, see if there's an opportunity, see who the owner of that opportunity is, and then let them know, hey, this person's out of office. I'm going to create a task for you the day that they return. And then if there's information of why they were out of office, giving that to the sales rep and being like, hey, look, they were on vacation in Hawaii. Maybe when you follow up, you should mention something about that, right? So not only does it keep you compliant for GDPR and unsubscribing and those, data requests that you might get in the EU. So like having an agent handle that when the only other way you would be able to do it is either try to build out logic where you're listening for certain keywords or have a person go through it, every day. That doesn't scale. So that's a good marketing one. On the sales side, let's say you're doing pre-sales discovery and you go to their LinkedIn and you try to do research on the company, look at their press releases. It could be 10 minutes of research time that a salesperson's doing before they go into a call, when all they would need to do is say, hey, I'm talking to this person who works at this company. Give me a kind of an executive brief of what we should be talking about, who this person is, going into that call. So what was a 10-minute task for sales is now a 30-second, prompt to an agent that then literally will generate a Google Doc that person can then leverage on a call.
So, just again to level set with some of our listeners out there, because I don't know how many people get into details. Like, I think a lot of people that listen to these a lot of times are probably more leaders and don't fully understand. But to paint a picture here, like today, if you guys came to me, let's say a CRO came to me today and said, hey, Jesse, we need to clean up all of our records, based on, do not contact or some of these other things. The way we go about doing that is we query data. Hopefully it's all in the right field. And if it's not, we'd have to figure out other fields, which could take some time.
Yep.
We'd then run an analysis. We'd then identify what records actually fall within that logic. Once we've identified that, and we've also identified that there are no other fields that maybe have captured this, no other data points inside of the system, which is very challenging. I make that sound very easy, very hard. Then we're going to do a data load more than likely to a certain field, maybe in Salesforce, that says do not contact. That process could take a week. It could take 3 weeks. It could take 2 months, depending on how large your data set is, et cetera. What you're talking about here is the data is already there, right? And so it's this idea that essentially you've got something else there that's looking across automatically, actually, as long as you feed it, to your point, kind of you give it its parameters of like, you can look at any object in Salesforce, for example, not just one object, but any object. And if you see, anything around this do not contact, please unsubscribe, any of that type of language, mark these records and identify them. And that's fairly instantaneous. There might be a few questions back we get, but we're talking about removing substantial amount of friction from the process and even getting insight and visibility to things that we might not even get to over 3 weeks of trying to work through this, right?
Yeah, and the cool thing about agents is they're not limited to just what's in Salesforce either. So let's say you use Chorus or Gong or some sort of call recording service, and someone picks up the phone, calls a BDR or a rep, and says, "Hey, please unsubscribe me from all my email communication." That rep couldn't do, like, let's say they don't do a single thing after they pick up that call. You could have an agent be going through those call transcripts and then taking action based on it. So in this case, removing them from maybe marketing material. But what happens if maybe you want to kind of aid reps to basically do follow-up emails or take notes and action items, and then turn those action items that Gong and Chorus kind of already are creating, but then have it then do something in the system like draft an email or create a task. So yeah, I mean, it gets exciting when you start thinking about like the actual real world use cases for it. But to your point, I think people are struggling to kind of figure out what those are right now. So like the more that I can do with like producing those on LinkedIn and stuff and sharing it, I think will help others kind of wrap their head around it and figure out what it actually means for their business.
So the other one that you brought up, which is, one of the things, the reason I had reached out to you, because I've been really like maniacally focused on solving this issue, but this whole idea of like creating an outbound engine. And we talked about this a few weeks ago on the call, but, one of the big challenges I see, and, I work for a global SaaS company and we're high growth and we're moving quickly. It's like, I've got all these tools to try to help with outbound, but none of them actually really facilitate the whole thing, right? It's still up to RevOps to, if you think about it, you've got, data enrichment tools like a Zoom Info, Cognism, Dun and Bradstreet. You might have a power dialer like an Orem. You might have an Outreach or SalesLoft for cadences and some of those different components within it, maybe emailing, et cetera.
Yep.
But really nothing's facilitating, then you've got LinkedIn, to your point, which is a great call out. Nothing's really facilitating across those things today, right? And I think that use case is something that I just this year I've just been in this like, why do I have so many tools? A and B, I'm paying how much money for it to not actually solve the problem. It's solving pieces, but it
Yeah.
doesn't actually solve the problem. When we think about, and this is why I got so excited about this agent concept. When we think about this agent thing, it's the idea that even let's just say you don't want to put in the hands of your reps the ability to, type in and prompt an agent. Let's just say that feels foreign right now. Even using somebody in RevOps to kind of be the prompter to say, hey, I want you to go in and look at the US. So my company is global. Look at the US territory. I want you to look at enterprise businesses. Look at all of the close one ops we've done over the last 2 years. And I want you to look at every title we've sold into. Cool. Now I want you to create me a target account list across all of the different regions. Give me 200 accounts within each of those. Enrich all of those accounts with good data. Make sure we put account hierarchy in place. And oh, by the way, I'd like 3 target contacts based on historical past data, put in the system. And then I want this pushed to a list so my reps can come in tomorrow morning and make cold calls on each one of those or do outreach programs across that. How possible are we at this point with that capability?
I would say like we're very, very close to doing that. I mean, I'm depending on the system and the flexibleness, if that's a word, of the APIs. Like Salesforce, you could probably build that today with just the APIs and in a third party, leveraging being the agent. Like I built one where I'm just like, hey, I want to create these campaigns and then I want it to be in this hierarchy, and then like I want you to go search for these contacts and add them to the campaign. That exists today. Like I made that, and I have a video on my LinkedIn if anyone wants to see it. And then when you think in terms of agents accessing tools like across your entire tech stack, like today I was working on one where I was creating Salesforce campaigns and also creating HubSpot campaigns all within one interface. So the agent has access to the ability to read and write Salesforce and read and write HubSpot, to where I now no longer have to log into Salesforce, create a campaign, grab the campaign ID, go into HubSpot, create that one, then make a workflow to actually connect the two because they don't currently play nice. So like an agent can now handle that, and that is available today. Now, I think administrators, to your point earlier about like we might not want to give the reps that, but the administrators who currently operate the systems, I think that in the next 2 years, that is going to be their go-to before they go in and export a CSV and put that on their computer and then query. Like those days are gone. I think that the minute that agents are leaned into and leveraged a little bit more, probably at the administrator level, it's going to then take off from there, and then we're going to have those administrators deploy more narrowly focused ones, I think, for end users like sales reps.
So as we think about, again, you just said we're pretty much there. And I think in some ways you could say we're there. It's all limitations based on the actual other softwares you're trying to leverage at this point, right? It's their APIs and really the
That
capabilities within those tools, right?
that and just general knowledge. Like there's so many people who I would consider at the forefront of technology who haven't even wrapped their head around how to leverage agents. Like Sam Altman, I think, said something like the biggest limitation to kind of like generate AI isn't actually AI. It's like we almost have to slow down the development of it to allow people to kind of catch up. So I mean, combination of having the endpoints and the data to access, but then also just the training and like the way that we rethink about how we run businesses is also going to kind of cause some friction of adoption of agents.
So look, speculation, everybody's got a lot of speculation around this. But if we make the assumption, and you even said it, you said, hey, I think that kind of gone are the days of this CSV export and really kind of manually, the data, the reality is this is going to change drastically, and the ramifications of that, actually to RevOps as a function, will change a lot, but also to businesses, right? The accelerate. I mean, it's like all things with innovation, right? Like the acceleration of capabilities are there. Like, what do you see? Again, looking out 2 to 5 years, because I think even 2 years, weirdly enough, like even though we're talking about this today, the reality is guarantee you very few businesses, maybe less than 20%, 2 years from now will have even adopted this, which is pretty crazy. But that's the nature of change, right? Change always is slow, especially in different segments. And so Talk to me a little bit, like, where do you see that evolving within RevOps? Like, either from a skill set perspective, from resources needed across an organization, what do you see that changing into?
Yeah, I mean, I think our problems are going to shift. Like I talked to some from RevOps people and they're like, "Oh, I even have a slogan on my LinkedIn that I'm basically automating myself out of a job." Like I joke, that's like tongue in cheek. I'm not automating myself out of a job. I think the problems that we're solving for are just going to change. I think before it was like, let's put in internal processes and make sure sales is they're uploading the lists, they're following this specific process instead of like trying to do sales training and enablement. I think our the way that we operate and spend like mental calories is going to be more putting the guardrails and the grounding the different agents that will let this sales team leverage. So I think the problems that we solve are just going to shift a little bit. But I mean, I'm hoping that like data quality is not going to be an issue for the next 2 years. Like I feel like with agents and enrichment providers and the way that the agents can even go online and like do research on behalf of users, like that should solve the data issue. So in 2 years, I'm hoping nobody is complaining about bad data.
Man, wouldn't that be amazing?
I mean, we'll see. Like, 10 years ago, it was like there's not enough data. And then, like, fast forward 5, 6 years from that, it's like, oh, we have too much data. And then now we just need more systems to leverage the data. And now we have too many systems and we got to like consolidate it. So, like, we're at that kind of thing, consolidation standpoint. And like you were mentioning, I have all of these tools, but like I'm not getting the value out of them. I think that's where we're at right now. And that's where I think agents can help plug the gap. It's you can build narrowly focused agents to accomplish tasks for your team to be more efficient, and then those tools that those agents have access to is your tech stack. So instead of telling sales to go into Gong and go into Salesforce and then go into this tool and that tool for enrichment, they just have one place that they can go, maybe Slack, that they can interface with an agent, and then you might have multiple agents or agent of agents that can accomplish tasks. So it gets very meta real quick.
When you think about value to a business, and we've talked a little bit about use case and value, but I think this is important. Like, how do you see and how do you break this out? Because I think it's easy for companies. Two things. One, companies don't like being early adopters in general because there's obviously risk with that, et cetera. But two, at the end of the day, too, I think it's this idea of, hey, we already have. I can tell you right now, I have over 30 tools. Right, I have 30 tools. Generally, if I go to my company and I say I'm going to get another tool without replacing one of them, that they'll probably give it to me, but they'll roll their eyes and they'll say, "Really, we need another one?" Right? That's that kind of like deep sigh Excel thing. And so, as you think about even what you're doing today and all that, like how do you see that value conversation? Because again, I think ultimately that's it, right? In RevOps, a lot of times I think we think about just being ops, but a lot of my job actually is selling vision, right? It's selling like where we're headed, getting buy-in across change, and really running change management across it. How do you see tying the value side of what we talked about today?
Yeah. So, I was chatting with someone talking about AI and they're like, oh, it can literally do everything. Like, and they were being kind of smart with me. They're like, well, AI can do everything. But so when it does everything, it can do nothing, right? Because someone can't wrap their head around, like you mentioned, the value of it. So, I recommend starting with a very narrowly focused use case. So I'll give you a real world example. This was when at my agency days, like 2 years ago, and they had an issue with LinkedIn lead gen forms. So whenever they had a form get submitted, there were open text fields for all of the values, including state and country. They would end up people misspelling state, misspelling country in every which way you could possibly imagine. So what they were doing is every week they were exporting that data and they were manually going through it, and we were having a human correct those values, right? You can't account for all of the different ways that someone's going to mess up a form. So what we did instead was we used OpenAI and we just fed it the field values, state and country. So we're not dealing with PII data; it's just state and country values. And our prompt was correct these values to the full state name, full country name, and if you can't figure it out, just put unknown. Like that simple little workflow turned what was a week and a half process that humans had to intervene that kept those leads from getting to sales for a week and a half to like 3 seconds. Like from the data submitting, going to OpenAI, and then going directly to Salesforce was like 30 seconds. So you go back to that salesperson or that executive and you go, we just took our time to lead to sales from a week and a half to 30 seconds. And you ask them what the value is in that. Like you got to tell a story and you got to solve real business problems. And if you can do that, you'll get buy-in. If you tell that to an executive and they're like, oh my goodness, like where else can we put this? Like where else are the bottlenecks for our business, running smoothly? And then you can kind of tie and weave AI into that.
It's interesting. We do a lot of conferences, and so a lot of our, inbound really comes from events. And so I have a pretty big market research team, uh, and one of the challenges we run into, we're really fast at like we tier out our leads, right, based on like, did we have a meeting with them, or did they just show up at the booth for free swag, or did they just attend the event, right? It's like you're kind of tiering out different leads, and we're really obviously we highly prioritize our A's, within that. But as we kind of get down the different tiers, it takes us sometimes weeks to enrich this information, right? And the reality is some of that, interestingly enough, like even your tier B and C is like they still were aware of us. It wasn't like, they just showed up at the event, they actually came to the booth, for example, et cetera. Well, let's say it takes 3 weeks to do that. I mean, I think all of us have seen the articles on it, but every day, actually, really every 15 minutes that goes by of not following up with leads, like the chances of closing that lead goes down insane amounts, right? And so, it's exactly what you're talking about. As we think about value, it really ties in to velocity in a lot of ways, right? It's like sales velocity is the thing that all of us, indirectly or maybe directly talk about. I've run into very few companies that actually directly measure it, but at least are talking around it, right? And so
Yep.
when we think about values, I think that's the thing that I always think through. It's not just saving like RevOps' team resources time, which is still big. It's also not just saving sales reps time, which is also huge. Obviously, more time for them to sell versus
Yep.
researching and doing, actually more time to do outreach versus researching outreach is huge. But the biggest one, I think, is exactly what you hit the nail on, which is that velocity, which is our time to reach out, our time to follow up. Even your example earlier, where you talked about, hey, I'm out of the office until March 15th. How many people actually follow up with that person, maybe March 17th when they're back
Right.
in office, right? And it's
Or
those little details, right, add up.
Yeah, or how many emails are getting buried in your general inbox where someone is genuinely interested in your product and services, but they're not getting responded to because it's in a flood of other, auto response. Or like using your example at events, I had another use case for a customer where they went to events and they got business cards. Well, LLMs have intelligent data processing for documents, so you can just take a picture of that business card and then just upload it to a form and have AI extract the email, the phone number, all the valuable information out of the business card, and then create the record in Salesforce in a fraction of a second, versus having a person kind of go through and manually type and create the CSV to create the record and get it to sales. So, yeah, I mean, I would map out where are those bottlenecks, where are those friction points for running your business from top to bottom. Survey different teams and departments. Maybe it's IT processing, tickets for customer issues. Well, if you could feed a knowledge base of the past solutions to past tickets to an LLM, and then you can empower the LLM to respond back to the customer like, hey, your issue sounds a lot like this one. Maybe this is the problem or the solution to your problem. And if it is, go ahead and close out the ticket yourself. Now you're taking the amount of tickets that go to sales from maybe hundreds, or if you're an enterprise company, tens of thousands, down to the ones that just the humans need to come in and work, versus them emailing and say, did you unplug it and plug it back in, right? Like I think the way that we do business is changing dramatically.
It's interesting. Maybe it was 6, 7 years ago. So if you think about it, that feels like a long time in tech. Was at a company, we were dealing with like cases were just overloading, the CS organization. And so, one of the CEO came to me and said, hey, I just need you to solve this. I need you to figure out, we were taking way too long to respond to our customers. What can we do? And so we ended up buying a tool. We ended up building out Salesforce communities and building out a knowledge center, which is great. But where the gaps were is it's actually similar to this LLM thing, which is like similarities, right? It was like there was no way, like Salesforce is not great at recognizing similarities in questions. There's a tool called Coveo. Coveo is a cool company. I think they're based out of British Columbia, Canada.
Mm.
And we implemented Coveo. That was literally 7 years ago. And I'm not kidding you. In 3 months, case deflections dropped by over 35% in
Yeah.
3 months. It was like I've never seen such a quick turnaround by putting, and we literally just laser focused on implementing that one thing. And then not only what happened with that was it not only helped our users actually answer their own questions, it helped our new CS reps get trained a lot faster because they could easily see, hey, these are other like similar questions that have been asked in the past, and here's how they were answered, right? And
Mm.
so that was 7 years ago. If you think about like how far, and I think like I can guarantee, I know to this day, like I have not worked at another company that's been that advanced in their capabilities there, which is kind of crazy. Again, back to like rate of change, still very slow. And so that's before this whole LLM thing really came full swing as well, which is really exciting when you think about it.
Yeah, and like if it scares you having, an AI agent basically replying back to your customers, like deploy internally, right? Build a tool to help your solutions team and your support team where maybe they can start to leverage it first, and you can, gut check it and make sure that it's working really well, and then maybe deploy it as a first line of defense on your customer side. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely phased approaches that you can go, but it would be a miss if I am like an executive or an owner practitioner of a company to basically ignore agents and not implement or at least tap a person in the organization to vet it out for different teams or departments.
So, kind of wrapping this up around that, actually. So, if I am an executive at a company and I'm like, man, this sounds super interesting, fascinating. Like, what type of person do I need to do it? And then, what is like, is there certain tools? Like, what are the things I need to kind of get started? Obviously, identify the use case is one thing, but then what are the tools and people that I need to actually tap to help me implement something like this?
Yeah, I mean, if I were a CEO, I would maybe work, depending on how big you are, work with your executive team to just identify a person or survey the team and be like, hey, who's interested in this? Who's the one who's kind of dabbling in this? And just kind of give them an assignment to, you know, immediately maybe audit their team and department to figure out where they can find value, or have them speak to other teams and departments and start to put together kind of like an attack plan of like, hey, here's at least an issue or a list of the issues that we'd like to solve. We don't really know if AI can do it or not, but like we've now documented it. And then, look at that list and then, have your person who's a little bit closer to AI, think about it, probably more someone on the ops side or maybe even on the IT side, and be like, hey, of all these issues, is there one of these that stand out that you can solve? Or literally go to ChatGPT, provide it the list, assuming there's no sense of information, and ask ChatGPT, of all of these issues, which one is poised the best maybe for an AI agent or AI to kind of help solve? And you might have ChatGPT write you a whole document of, which ones fit better than other ones and why.
That's awesome. And then tool wise, is there certain types of tools that you feel like are really poised right now? And like, because again, obviously Salesforce has theirs, but limited by Salesforce and it's pretty new. Like, where do you see those capabilities mostly lying today?
Yeah, I would say there's a lot of in-app tools which are interesting, and then you kind of have the iPaaS space, which is where I sit in. So the way that I think about agents in AI and even automation of within tools, I like to have kind of my infrastructure outside of a specific platform or ecosystem. So like, I kind of went through the evolutionary phase of building in apps where I built my automations in Marketo, and I built my Salesforce automations in Salesforce, and my HubSpot automations in HubSpot. But I kind of grew past that where I was having conflicts of data records syncing and like, things running into each other. So I pulled it out of that and put it into an iPaaS. That's kind of where I built my automations. And then today, this is where I'm building my agents, because again, you can connect into all your systems and tools, and you don't have to build those like disparate point solution agents like Agentforce within Salesforce.
And for those listening, iPaaS really is again, it's think about it as tools that help integrate other tools together. Essentially, is like the easiest way to break that down. And so, not only can you leverage this tool for things like an agent, but it also has other capabilities to help facilitate integration across multiple platforms and even some other automation triggers. We use it a lot of times actually for data pipelines, even as well.
Yep.
depending on the tool. So there's a lot of use cases behind it, and cost wise, actually not anywhere near in the ballpark of what a Salesforce cost. I mean, if I think about what Salesforce costs for my organization for versus like the iPaaS solution we use, it's like 1/10 of the cost, maybe even actually less than that when I think about it. So,
Yep.
again, we're not talking like, I think a lot of times when you hear these types of things, you think like, oh no, another budget item, something else I've got to do. Not to say there's money associated with it, but again, it's your cost to overcome value is a lot lower in a tool like this than say something like a Salesforce that has a massive cost associated with it. Not to say there isn't value there, but it is, I think, something to be aware of. Don't write something off like this without looking into it, because I don't think it's the barrier to entry is not nearly as significant as what it probably was at one point.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And iPaaS stands for integration platform as a service. So I probably should have started there versus throwing out crazy acronyms like us RevOps people like to do.
I think everybody in the SaaS industry likes to do it in their own way, depending on what
Yeah.
vertical you're in. So, well, Steven, man, it's been fun, dude. Thanks again for joining. For those of you listening, I will put a link to Steven's profile. Definitely check him out. He's got some good content on there. You can also see what company he's working at and some of the exciting things they're doing there. But hopefully it's been beneficial. Thanks again for joining today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us today on RevOps Revolution with Jesse Morris. Before you go, you know what to do. Go hit subscribe on your favorite podcast player app so you don't miss a future episode. And while you're at it, tell a friend about the show. Here's to the revolution.